hard promoting Scotland interests overseas, and Scotland has a wonderful Foreign Secretary in the form of James Cleverly.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The SNP Scottish Government's attempts to promote Scotland internationally include awarding ferry contracts to yards in Turkey rather than in Scotland. But given that just yesterday the SNP accepted it would be cheaper to build new ferries from scratch rather than complete the current ship in Ferguson Marine, does the Secretary of State agree with me that Scotland's international reputation for shipbuilding has been severely damaged by the SNP? And worst of all, islanders have been abandoned by these contracts that are now 6 years late and more than 3 times over budget.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is of course right. The island communities have been terribly let down by this Scottish Government. And I would say, I know he's referring to the ministerial direction yesterday to carry on with the second ferry. Ministers should always spend taxpayers' money efficiently, even if it means losing face.
Robin Miller.
Mr. Speaker, and is it not the case that Scotland, like Wales, benefits from the UK's membership of the G7, of NATO, and our many diplomatic missions around the world?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. Scotland's membership as part of the United Kingdom of those incredible organisations is just another advantage of being part of the United Kingdom.
Shadow Minister Liz Truss.
Mr. Speaker, promoting Scotland overseas is vital, but so is the ability of tourists visiting Scotland to tour the fantastic island. Now, earlier this week, the Scottish Transport Minister told the Scottish Parliament that he had overruled civil servants who had serious concerns about the continuation of the disastrous Calmac ferry project being a waste of taxpayers' money. Scottish taxpayers' money has been wasted on this poorly managed scheme and islanders left stranded. But last week, we learned that a Green Scottish Government minister had chartered a private yacht to visit the Isle of Rum. Does the Secretary of State share my concerns that the Scottish Government is misusing taxpayers' money while the islands are left without transport connections?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly do.
Chair of the Select Committee, Pete Wishart.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State, of course, will know that the Scottish Affairs Committee are currently conducting an inquiry into how Scotland is promoted internationally. All we've heard is just how well the UK and Scottish Government work together about the added value that the Scottish Government mission brings to that promotion. So why is he determined to pick a fight unnecessarily and get in the way of this business?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman will know from my submission to his committee and its inquiry, that is not what I think. What I think is that the UK government should work with the devolved administrations to promote them overseas, to promote trade overseas. But I also believe is that when the devolved administrations are using our missions overseas, they should be not using them to promote their plans for separation, nor to undermine our foreign policy.
Kevin Foster.
Question number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 5 and 13 together. Scotland Office ministers and officials have regular discussions with colleagues across government about Lord Hendy's Union Connectivity Review. Indeed, I recently met with stakeholders to discuss cross-border rail services between Scotland and England and to learn more about a range of transport connectivity projects. We are also engaging with the devolved administrations and other stakeholders to consider Lord Hendy's recommendations.
Kevin Foster.
Speaker, direct train services between Scotland and the southwest of England not only provide a useful connection for leisure travellers, but they also boost our wider economies. What discussions has he had with the Secretary of State for Transport about developing these further, including direct links to Torquay and Paignton, as part of future planning for the cross-country franchise?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend's enthusiasm for such rail links. The Department for Transport is developing a new cross-country national rail contract that is expected to commence in October 2023. As part of timetable development, officials met recently with representatives of Transport Scotland. The connectivity and other benefits of providing through services between Scotland and Torquay can be looked at during the new cross-country contract.
Paul Howell.
The main artery between London, Edinburgh, Scotland is the East Coast Main Line, on which run the fantastic Azuma trains built in my Newton Aycliffe constituency. But the resilience of that line in North East England is severely hampered both in terms of capacity and in terms of resilience. Can I ask whether he's spoken to the Department for Transport about supporting the Leamside Line project to add to both of those initiatives?
Mr Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for that question. Now, proposals to reopen the Leamside Line were carefully considered as part of the development of the integrated rail plan. On the basis of available evidence and value for money analysis, the Government believes that the case for the reopening of the route would be best considered as part of any future city-region settlements. The Department for Transport will continue its engagement with local stakeholders as any proposals are developed further.
David Linden.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. If levelling up is to mean anything in the UK, can the Minister say when HS2 will reach Glasgow?
Mr Speaker, this Government remains absolutely committed to the levelling up agenda across all parts of the United Kingdom, including in Scotland and in his own constituency in Glasgow. I'm happy to contact the Department for Transport on his behalf to get him an answer.
Christine Geordie.
Number 8, please, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, we're committed to working with the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and the Scottish Government in our shared ambition to protect marine ecosystems. However, we also note the legitimate concerns from the fishing industry about the impact the designation of highly protected marine areas may have on Scotland's coastal and island communities.
Christine Geordie.
Thank you very much. Communities like mine in Edinburgh West benefit from a strong Scottish fishing industry, bringing high-quality produce to our shops and restaurants. However, the controversial proposals to which the Secretary of State referred for highly protected marine areas would impose strict restrictions which the Scottish Fishermen's Federation have called fundamentally flawed on 10% of our waters. There's no trialling, there's no pilot scheme. So, will the Secretary of State commit to sharing the details of the pilot scheme, which I know the UK Government is running, with the Scottish Government, and continue to press for measures which will support rather than restrict communities?
Mr Speaker, I say to the Honourable Lady, we will share the results of those pilot schemes, and I would just reiterate what the Prime Minister said, I think, at PMQs last week to the Honourable Gentleman from Caithness in Sutherland, which is that the Scottish Government should U-turn on this issue. They should respect that fishing communities know what's best to preserve stocks, they know what's best for future generations, and I think the Scottish Government do well to pay attention to them.
David Dewitt.
Much, Mr Speaker. I know my honourable friend will agree with myself and the fishing industry in Scotland that we are not against conservation and sustainability in principle, but does my honourable friend agree that the haste with which the Scottish Government is trying to implement its highly protected marine areas policy is yet another case of the green tail wagging the SNP dog, and this could have an extremely damaging consequence for coastal communities right across Scotland, including mine in Banff-and-Buchan?
Well, for those that have heard the question, the answer is yes.
Right, we now come to Prime Minister's questions. Cat Smith.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I have been asked to reply on behalf of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. He is currently travelling to Japan to attend the G7 summit. Mr Speaker, I'm sure that colleagues from across the House will join me in congratulating Liverpool for its wonderful staging of the Eurovision Song Contest on behalf of Ukraine. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
The Royal Lancaster Infirmary is a 130-year-old crumbling hospital and was meant to be one of the government's 40 new hospitals. However, the funding announcement has been delayed 4 times already, so can the Deputy Prime Minister reassure my constituents that this is not going to be another broken Tory promise?
I can absolutely assure the honourable lady that we remain fully committed to those 40 hospitals from our manifesto, and indeed we have already provided £3.9 billion worth of initial capital.
Craig McKinley.
Mr. Speaker, I have a very serious matter affecting every constituency to bring to my right honourable friend's attention. Amazon have been facilitating the sale of counterfeit postage stamps from China, virtually perfect except for the barcode. I've contacted the NCA, the National Trading Standards, and I'm afraid I've received woeful responses. I've now sent my concerns to the Serious Fraud Office and the Economic Crime Unit of the City of London Police. Amazon are patently facilitating remittances of illegal gotten cash, and I believe this is in contravention of the Forgery and Counterfeiting Act 1981. Can my right honourable friend assist me in taking this further?
Well, Mr. Speaker, may I pay tribute to my honourable friend? I know how hard he has been campaigning on this important issue. The Home Secretary will have heard his remarks. I would say that the Digital Markets and Competition and Consumer Bill does put duties on those platforms, and ultimately, if fraud is being perpetrated, the police should take action.
We now come to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to welcome yet another Deputy Prime Minister to the dispatch box, the third Deputy that I've faced in 3 years. And you know what they say, the third time's a charm. And I'm also pleased to note, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister has a working-class friend, finally. I seem to remember that after the loss of 300 Conservative seats at last year's local elections, the right honourable gentleman resigned, saying someone must take responsibility. After 1,000 more Conservative councillors have been given the boot by voters, who does he think is responsible now?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of the Right Honourable Lady's opening remarks, can I just say it really is a pleasure to see the Right Honourable Lady here today. I was, though, expecting to face the Labour leader's choice for the next Deputy Prime Minister if they win the election, so I'm surprised that the Lib Dem leader isn't taking questions today. You will forgive me, Mr. Speaker, you will forgive me if I take the Right Honourable Lady's predictions with a pinch of salt. After all, she confidently predicted that the Right Honourable Member for Islington North would one day be Prime Minister. Remember, this is a man who wanted to abolish the army, scrap Trident, withdraw from NATO and abandon Ukraine. And what did she say to that? She couldn't wait for him to be Prime Minister.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely amazing that while the Labour Party is preparing to govern with a Labour majority, his party is starting to prepare for opposition, Mr. Speaker. And this week, at the National Conservative Conference, a member for Devisers blamed the country's problems on a new religion. He even hit out at the dystopian fantasy of John Lennon. The member for Pentonstone and Stockbridge said identifying falling birthing rates is the overarching threat to the UK. She criticised woke teaching for destroying children's souls and causing self-harm and suicide among people. And the Right Honourable Member for North East Somerset really let the cat out the bag when he said parties that try to gerrymander end up finding their clever schemes come back to bite them, as dare I said we found when insisting on voter ID. The Right Honourable gentleman opposite, while working in Number 10, said he had to listen to the radio every morning to find out what was really going on in the country. Apparently, he was surprised on a daily basis by what he learned. And most of his time was spent on day-to-day crisis management. 11 years on, Mr. Speaker, nothing has changed.
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'm not quite sure what the question was there, Mr. Speaker. But if she wants to talk about this sort of thing, We all know what's going on with her and her leader. It's all lovey-dovey on the surface. They turn it on for the cameras, but as soon as they're off, it's a different story. They're at each other's throats. Mr. Speaker, they're the Phil and Holly of British politics.
Deputy Leader.
Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reality is, after 13 years of Tory rule, they're still lurching from crisis to crisis and wallowing in their own mess. They can't solve the crisis because they are the crisis. The honourable member opposite should take more note of what's happening at his conferences in his party before trying to make up what's happening in mine. The Prime Minister pledged that by March, NHS waiting lists would fall. It's now May. So can he tell us, since he made that pledge, is the number of people waiting on late waiting lists higher or lower?
Mr. Speaker, we are making good progress, for example, with two-year waiting lists. But the Right Honourable Lady seems to forget a crucial fact. The United Kingdom experienced an unprecedented pandemic. Right before COVID, GP satisfaction was high. Delayed discharges were half. Ambulance targets were being met. And she knows that right now, in Labour-run Wales, exactly the same challenges are being faced. The difference between us is, on this side of the House, we've got a plan to fix it, while she's too busy playing petty politics.
Mr. Speaker, even before the pandemic, waiting lists were going up. So it doesn't wash that this government, after 13 years in power, is blaming everybody but themselves for what people are having to put up with. He appears to be claiming that 11,000 patients waiting more than 18 months is an achievement. The last Labour government reduced waiting times from 18 months to 18 weeks, and he can come back to me when he's achieved that. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, waiting lists are longer than when the Prime Minister made his pledge 5 months ago. The number of people in England waiting to start hospital treatment is the highest since records began. 7.3 million patients left waiting. Now, I know the Prime Minister has his own private GP, so maybe he doesn't appreciate the urgency. But he's left people like my constituent Carol waiting for over a year for an urgent appointment, moved from waiting list to waiting list with appointments cancelled again and again. So if not now, when will waiting lists fall?
Order. It'll continue till I hear the end of this question. If I get any more interruptions, it will take longer. Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, they don't want to hear the question because they know the answer. They know the answer is that they failed the British people. So when will waiting lists fall?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I would gently say to the Right Honourable Lady, if she cares that much about access to our healthcare, why is she opposing our minimum service levels? They will provide core emergency services with vital cover during healthcare strikes. Does she not think that vulnerable patients deserve that level of care, or is she too weak to stand up to her union paymasters?
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, we all want minimum service levels. It's this government that have failed to provide minimum service levels in all of our trains, in all of our public services, because they've run them down and mismanaged them for the last 13 years. Now, it's not just waiting times, Mr. Speaker. 13 years after the Landmark Marmot review into child poverty, Sir Michael says this government is on track to make child poverty worse, with more than a quarter of our children living in poverty last year. When I was a young mum, I remember the sick feeling in my stomach not knowing if my wages would cover the bills. Yet his government has taken a wrecking ball to measures by the last Labour government to eradicate child poverty, even abolishing the child poverty unit. They tried to justify this by saying they no longer needed a child poverty unit because they've abolished the child poverty targets. So can he tell us what level of poverty he considers to be a success?
I would say to the right honourable lady, this comprehensive schoolboy is not going to take any lectures from the party opposite about the lives of working people. What I would say is that we have introduced record increases in the national living wage, something that this party introduced, the party opposite failed to do so. And we have taken 1 million working age people out of poverty altogether. That is the record of my party, and one of which I am very proud.
Angela Rayner.
Mr Speaker, the last Labour government made it their mission to reduce the number of children in poverty by 1 million. We achieved that. Under the Tories, child poverty is nearly back to the level it was when Labour last inherited the Tory mess. After 13 years of the Tories, they're stuck in a conveyor belt of crisis. And while his party is preparing for opposition with their Trump Tribute Act conference over the road, Labour are focused on fixing the real problems facing British people. The Tories have picked their side. They're for the vested interests, for the oil companies and the bankers, for those that are profiting from the crisis and not suffering from it. Whether it's failing the millions of people anxiously waiting for treatment or overseeing a rise in child poverty. And while his colleagues spout nonsense at their carnival of conspiracy, I want to know, when will his party stop blaming everybody else and realise that the problem is them?
Mr Speaker, I will proudly defend our record in office. Crime down 50%, near record levels of employment, a record minimum wage. And what, Mr Speaker, what's their record? 4 general election defeats, 30 promises already broken, and 1 leader who let anti-Semitism run wild. That is why the British people will never trust the Labour Party.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Would my right honourable friend please send his condolences to the family of Hilton Ward councillor Gillian Lemon, who at the young age of 52 tragically died partway through the election count on Friday. This means that the whole election for all 3 councillors has had to be voided, even though the returning officer was ready to declare 3 Conservative councillors for the Hilton Ward. Perhaps following this dreadful experience, my right honourable friend will confirm that the best way to thank Councillor Gillian Lemon for her service is for the good people of Hilton Ward in South Derbyshire to vote again 3 times for the 3 Conservative candidates on Thursday the 15th of June.
Well, Mr Speaker, may I extend my deepest sympathies on behalf of these benches and the Conservative Party to Councillor Gillian Lemon's family. We all know how incredibly hard local councillors work, and she was a strong representative of South Derbyshire. And like my honourable friend, I do hope that the people of Hilton Ward will reflect on this by voting for Conservative candidates at the forthcoming election.
We now come to the Deputy Leader of the SNP, Murray Black.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2016, the Deputy Prime Minister told his constituents in a blog that it was his duty to, and I quote, furnish them with all the facts that are available with regards to Brexit. Today, Brexit Britain faces higher food prices, a lack of workers, a shrinking economy and a decline in living standards. Why is he happy to ignore those facts?
The Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, we have one of the fastest growth rates in the whole of the G7 since Brexit. And we all know, and in fairness, we all know the policy of the SNP. And they said it this weekend, I quote, we need to undo Brexit. But let me tell you, if I were them, I'd start by undoing the mess they've left Scotland in and start working with the United Kingdom government and focus on the priorities of the Scottish people, not the priorities of their party.
Murray Black.
Check the data.
Mr Speaker, the only thing more deluded than that defence of Brexit is the Labour Party's support of it. Now, just today, the world's 4th largest car manufacturer said that Brexit was, and again I quote, a threat to our export business and the sustainability of our UK manufacturing options. Even Nigel Farage can admit that Brexit has failed. So, Mr Speaker, why can't he?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I would say to the Honourable Lady, one of the best ways of getting behind industry in this country is get behind the trade deals we're striking with many countries around the world, which they have singularly failed to oppose. And I see last week the SNP promised to build a new Scotland. I don't know whether she's aware, but the SNP have been in power for 13 years. Perhaps they should stop their focus on independence and focus on the priorities of the Scottish people.
Esther McVey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency has a problem with travellers. My constituency has a problem with travellers pitching on private land and common land and causing a nuisance currently on Parkgate Industrial Estate in Knutsford. Either the police don't have sufficient powers to deal with this issue, or they do have sufficient powers but they're not using them. So will the Deputy Prime Minister get the government to speak with Cheshire Police to ensure that they do have the powers to deal with this plight on our local community and that they use them?
Well, the Right Honourable Lady, my right honourable friend, is absolutely right to highlight the misery caused by unauthorised encampments. I've seen this in my own constituency as well. I understand that Home Office officials do regularly liaise with the National Police Chiefs Council on this, but of course my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will have heard my right honourable friend's representations, and I trust she will act on those.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Mr Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister will be aware of the ongoing concerns of unionists in Northern Ireland about our ability to trade freely within the United Kingdom and its internal market, given the continued application of EU law on the manufacture of all goods in Northern Ireland. We now have proposals for a future border operating model that could potentially create further barriers to trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Will the Deputy Prime Minister give me an assurance that the Government will, in law, protect Northern Ireland's ability to trade freely within and with the rest of the United Kingdom?
Yes, well, I would like to say that we've already shown a willingness to legislate to protect Northern Ireland's place within the Union, and we're committed to providing exactly the protections that the Right Honourable Gentleman refers to around Northern Ireland's unfettered access to the whole United Kingdom market. So I can give those assurances, and of course we stand ready to work with the Right Honourable Gentleman and representatives across unionism to reflect the further steps required to strengthen our precious union.
Angela Richardson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Throughout the early hours of Saturday morning, I was out with Kathy, Peter, Joe and Tim, who volunteer as Guildford Street Angels. I pay tribute to them and all the volunteers who are out every weekend and in all weathers. But, Mr Speaker, it's an absolute disgrace that the Liberal Democrat-run council shut the public loose. At night, there are no single-sex spaces for our young women, and they are seeking out dark, secluded areas if they're caught short, which is dangerous. They are at increased risk of sexual assault. Will my right honourable friend join me in calling for the immediate reopening of the town centre loos in Guildford?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this very important issue, and sadly, I'm afraid that's what one might expect from a Lib Dem-run council. I do join her in thanking the Guildford Street Angels for all of their efforts, and I'm sure that they and she will continue to make those views known to Guildford Borough Council.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Many of my constituents are struggling to pay the bills and put food on the table. Food prices have risen by over 19% in the last year, with the cheapest infant formula up 45%, gas prices up 129%, electricity up 67%. Many report borrowing more money than this time last year, with car manufacturers threatening to move production. The OBR saying $100 billion has been lost from the economy forever, and wages falling further and further behind basic living expenses. So does he really still believe his government's kamikaze Brexit is delivering for the people of these isles?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I certainly do believe that, Mr. Speaker, and I would say to the members on those benches that it's only because of the strength of our United Kingdom that we're able to afford the sort of interventions, for example, that we've had with the cost of living, with over £3,300 for every single family in our United Kingdom, paid for by a 75% windfall tax on oil and gas companies. That's the United Kingdom delivering on the cost of living.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2016, we secured over £300 million for the modernisation of A&E services in Shropshire. 6 years on, that money has still not been spent and construction hasn't started. I have a real concern about the quality of managers within our local NHS trust, that this decision has not been taken. What can my right honourable friend do to help us in Shropshire to ensure that finally the £312 million is spent and that A&E services are modernised, because there is nothing more important than the safety of constituents when they go into A&E services?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I pay tribute to my honourable friend for raising this issue. I know that his constituents are anxious for building work to get underway as soon as possible. And I know that the Department for Health are working closely with NHS England and the Trust to support the development of the scheme. And the Trust is due to submit plans to the Department for Health in the coming months, and the Department will work at pace to review those plans.
Marshal de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Leaseholders in Battersea are trapped in an outdated and unfair leasehold system. The Secretary of State said, and I quote, "The government would absolutely maintain a commitment to abolish the leasehold system and would bring forward legislation shortly." But we now know that this is no longer the case. So, Deputy Prime Minister, why has the government yet again done another U-turn and yet again broken another promise to leaseholders to scrap its plans to end the outdated leaseholder system?
Well, I'd like to reassure the Honourable Lady and members of this House that the Government is committed to reforming the leaseholder system to give homeowners greater control and give cheaper access to leaseholder renewal, including a 990-year extension with zero financial ground rent. And we will set out plans for further reforms later in this Parliament.
So Desmond Sway.
What would be a reason for extending the general election franchise to settled EU citizens, a population of voters equal to the number in Wales?
Well, I think my honourable friend is referring to the plans from the party opposite. And it's actually quite interesting that this week, while we're pushing ahead with legislation to break the smuggling gangs, what's Labour's big idea? Give foreign nationals a say in our elections. So there we have it. While the Conservatives will stop the boats, Labour will rig the votes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was concerned to read last week that the Prime Minister had to be airlifted to a pharmacy in Southampton after suffering electoral dysfunction. Several weeks earlier, he flew all the way from Lancashire to Yorkshire by private jet. Meanwhile, angry rail commuters face the reality of cancellations, longer journey times, and are unable to get to work on time as operators shed services. The public think that the Prime Minister's got his head in the clouds. They're right, aren't they?
It is quite extraordinary, Mr. Speaker, to take lectures from the party opposite about the railways when actually the head of the train drivers' union actually sits on Labour's NEC. And indeed, she was described by the Right Honourable Lady, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, as, quote, one of us. No wonder Labour won't stand up to the militant rail unions. They literally let them drive their policies.
Mr. Speaker, incredible regeneration work is taking place on Teesside, led by our Mayor, Ben Houchin. Sadly, we have seen a shameful attempt to smear the amazing Teesworks project, led by the Honourable Member for Middlesbrough, who I've given advance notice to. Will he confirm that it was always an integral part of the business case that the private sector should co-invest alongside government, and that the Teesworks arrangements themselves have been checked and approved by the government? And will he reconfirm his full support for the Teesworks projects, reassure investors, and join me in calling for the Labour Party to apologise for talking down Teesside?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct to raise this issue. It is the UK's first free port, and it continues to attract billions of pounds of private sector investment, creating jobs and supporting the local economy. And I think the whole House will see through the inexcusable attempts by the Labour Party to talk down those successes on Teesside, where local leaders are working tirelessly to improve that region for the first time in a generation.
Mr. Speaker, in 2011, the first year that the Tories came into government, 61,000 people received emergency food parcels from food banks. In 2022-23, that figure had gone up to nearly 3 million. 1 million of them children. It's gone up every year that the Conservatives have been in power, bar one. So, will he tell the House, is that a record that he proudly defends?
I'm very proud of the fact that this government has given record numbers of people the opportunity to have jobs and employment, which is the surest route out of poverty. And it is the case that I believe up to 3.6 million new jobs have been created under this government.
Walker. Mr. Speaker, it's truly excellent news to see England rising up the international league tables for reading to become the highest performing country in the Western world. That's testament to the hard work of our teachers and the dedication of our honourable friend for Bognor to follow evidence-based policy. But this progress will only be sustained if children are in school regularly, able to learn. So can I strongly commend to him and to the government the 10-minute rule bill presented by my honourable friend for Meon Valley. It has cross-party support, delivers on key recommendations of the Education Select Committee and the Children's Commissioner. The government should adopt it as soon as possible.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight those brilliant figures which show that we've now jumped to the fourth best in the whole world for reading. And I certainly see in schools it's much, much more demanding than it was in my day, and that's tribute to the ministerial team that have done such a fabulous job. I will, of course, examine the details of the 10-minute rule bill to which he refers.
Tommy Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, it is an open secret that many in the Conservative Party would wish to roll back the democratic gains of devolution either in part or completely. The noble Lord Frost, former Minister, the architect of the disastrous Brexit agreement and now, I believe, seeking a safe Tory seat in this chamber, recently let the cat out of the bag when he said the government should review and roll back some devolved powers.
Just try it.
Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with him?
Hear, hear.
I would say to the honourable gentleman, the only thing that will destroy devolution is a vote for independence in Scotland, as advocated by those on those benches.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I congratulate my right honourable friend on a brilliant first performance at Prime Minister's question. Will he keep the government laser-focused on the issues that matter to people like the cost of living in the NHS, and on the issues of the future, like artificial intelligence, which needs regulatory attention, and ignore the reactionary voices, no matter where they come from?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this. I'm incredibly optimistic about the future of this country in industries across the piece, including digital or indeed film and television in my own constituency. We're genuinely world-leading, creating high-quality jobs that we want our children or grandchildren to have.
Sean Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Half the children in Newcastle Central are growing up in poverty. Shocking. Over the last 5 years, the delivery of food parcels to North East children has risen by 250%. The number of North East children who are homeless rose by 50% last year. On average, their parents' wages will have fallen by £1,000, and if any of this affects their mental health, they face a 5-month wait for treatment. Why is his government making it so hard for our kids?
But I really think this House needs a correction on the facts, given what's come from the party opposite. It is the case that because of our national living wage, defined as more than at least 2/3 of median income, that's at its lowest point for years, and we've actually lifted 1.7 million people out of absolute poverty altogether. That is the track record of this government.
Gillis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The people of Longport and Burslem, as well as Port Hill and my neighbouring constituency neighbour of Newcastle to Lyme, are suffering because of cowboy waste disposals like Staffordshire Waste, who have now been again done for having waste that was not meant to be on site and have been given a notice by the Environment Agency. What support can I get in holding these people to account and making sure that their retrospective planning application for a site that they're using, which they didn't get planning permission on before using, is rejected by Stoke-on-Trent City Council?
Well, my honourable friend is right to raise this issue of those kind of people, and indeed we often see them associated with fly tipping, which is a blight on our landscape. I will ensure that I raise all the issues that he has raised with me with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, who has ministerial responsibility for this.
Rachel Vaskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Crisis mental health services are in crisis. Patients and families gaslit and at risk. It is Mental Health Awareness Week, but no government awareness to ensure my constituents are safe, nor funding and workforce needs met. So why is his government sat on their hands with a devastating report sat on the Health Secretary's desk, while patients in York and across the NHS are being failed? Can I and the Trust have an urgent meeting?
Well, I'm sure one of my ministerial colleagues in the health team will be happy to have that meeting. I would just say that under this government, we've put more money into mental health services, and actually we're funding 150 wider capital schemes. So this government has made mental health services a priority.
Final question, Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is Wales Tourism Week, an opportunity to celebrate one of Wales's most important businesses, which represents 10% of all jobs, supports Welsh farmers and food producers, and generates £6 billion in economic activity each year. Would the Deputy Prime Minister join me in thanking all those that work in the Wales tourism sector, and would he agree with me that this UK government's TIPS bill demonstrates its commitment to supporting the tourism sector, unlike Labour in Cardiff, whose proposed tourism tax will undermine visits and undermine jobs?
Well, of course, I'm most happy to give that commitment to my honourable friend. Indeed, I have spent many happy family holidays in Wales and plan to do so again next year.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.